There were some issues here, and we addressed those issues. But I'm not going to sit here and say anybody did anything wrong.
ICE's abuses cannot be solved merely through executive fiat alone. We first and foremost need legislation.
This is Today as It Happened. Good Thursday evening to you. I'm Holly Furfer here with your chronological look at the biggest events and stories of the day. From ICE officials and Minnesota leaders testifying before the Senate Homeland Security Committee to the looming funding deadline for the Department of Homeland Security. But first, let's take a look at some of our other top headlines of the day. The immigration surge in Minnesota is finally coming to an end. That's according to border czar Tom Homan. He claims the Twin Cities are safer because of what ICE has accomplished there.
As a result of our efforts here, Minnesota is now less of a sanctuary state for criminals. And we are proud of the public safety threats we have removed from the criminal elements out of the state.
Federal authorities say the sweeps in Minneapolis have led to the arrest of more than 4,000 people, but many of those arrests have included people with no criminal records, including children and U.S. citizens. Turning now to Arizona, where the search for Nancy Guthrie is now entering its 12th day. Investigators say they are combing through 18,000 tips they've received. Meanwhile, her neighbors have been asked to check any footage from doorbell cameras from before the 84-year-old went missing, as well as the day she was last seen by family members. Here's the latest video of the suspect seen on her front porch. The FBI is offering a $50,000 reward for information. If you know anything, they ask you call 1-800-CALL-FBI. Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal is accusing Attorney General Pam Bondi of spying on her search history. Jayapal went to the Department of Justice this week to review unredacted Epstein files. And she claims Bondi showed up to Capitol Hill with notes on Jayapal's search history printed out. Jayapal calls that totally inappropriate and outrageous, and she intends to pursue this moving forward. So far, no comment from Pam Bondi. Lawsuits are stacking up against the federal government over the use by federal agents of chemical irritants and projectiles during many recent protests. Scripps News senior national investigative correspondent Lori Jane Gliha live with us now on her investigation and why some citizens say they've just had enough. Lori Jane?
Holly, we've been gathering photos and videos and legal complaints showing that the munitions authorities are using are not just affecting protesters, but also people who just happen to live in the area.
In Minneapolis, photos captured authorities spraying demonstrators directly in the face. Near Los Angeles, a federal agent fired a projectile that struck a college student in the eye. In Chicago, agents launched pepper balls at a crowd of demonstrators, striking a church pastor in the head. And in Portland, Oregon, this photo captured the bloody forehead of an elderly woman after she said she was struck with a projectile. She told Scripps News she is still having trouble breathing, months after she and her husband, using a walker in this picture, got hit with smoky irritants while demonstrating outside the Immigration and Customs Enforcement building in their own neighborhood.
This is the ICE facility here in Portland, and when agents try to break up the crowds with irritants, it's not just the protesters here on the ground who are impacted. It's also people who live right across the street.
In January, Mindon Ocon's balcony security camera captured this footage showing irritants billowing toward her third-floor apartment across the street from ICE. She lives here with her 3-year-old daughter.
You know, I just think about her health and like the chemicals. I'm getting hot and cold flashes. I'm getting Charlie horses. Like I wake up and my whole body is hurting and I'm like, I don't feel good. I'll just randomly start coughing so hard to the point where I'm like, I want to throw up.
See, there they go.
Scripps News gathered these videos and images from several protests in 2025 and 2026 near the same location. And we obtained these 911 calls from concerned neighbors.
I'm not even a protester. I'm in my apartment, and I cannot breathe, and it sucks.
You need to send hazmat. You need to send people to help wash people's eyes.
I can't leave my house because there's tear gas in the hallways when it got on my back door. And I am scared. There's like tear gas everywhere.
LaShonda Shavers made that last 911 phone call.
So you live on the 5th floor,
Yes.
and that's the ICE facility right there.
Yes.
She also captured footage while live streaming several nights from this balcony.
And this is a Macadam immigration facility. And that cloud of smoke you see in the air is tear gas that was just deployed.
She says the chemicals are making her existing respiratory problems worse.
Did you ever think living in an apartment that you were going to need your own respirator mask and an air purifier?
No, not at all. But I didn't realize I was that close to the ICE facility.
If you could speak directly to the authorities who are using these munitions, what would you want them to know?
I would want them to know that they claim that they're doing this to protect their physical safety and the facility. But bottom line is that every attack I've seen has happened from the roof.
Several of LaShonda's neighbors joined a lawsuit against the federal government, claiming residents are suffering immense physical and psychological harm. Meanwhile, Scripps News obtained new data the county health department is now tracking, showing at least 29 people went to the emergency room or urgent care for protest-related injuries between June 2025 and February 1st, 2026, many related to projectile strikes or chemical agents.
There's really a lot that we don't know about the effects of tear gas, especially repeated exposures, and that's what concerns me.
What changes do you think should happen at the federal level?
I think there are lots of good examples from around the country, but reducing harm is always the goal of public health.
The Portland ICE facility declined an interview, but told Scripps News people can expect to be met with force, including pepper spray, if they try to obstruct law enforcement activities. Scripps News obtained this 911 call from late January.
We had protesters tearing down fences, breaking into the facility.
ICE gave us this statement that says, in part, ICE officers are trained to use the minimum amount of force necessary to resolve dangerous situations, to prioritize the safety of the public and our officers. Over and over again, people with nothing better to do choose to ignore warnings, including over a loudspeaker, and have attempted to impede our officers and have thrown rocks, bottles, and fireworks at them, have used vehicles as weapons against them, and have shot at them. For neighbors like LaShonda Shavers and Mindan Okan,
And then
regardless of what's happening outside, on the ground, staying at home, they say, should be safe.
And earlier this month, in response to a lawsuit filed by a group of demonstrators and journalists, a judge issued a temporary restraining order, Holly, saying federal agents may not use chemical or projectile munitions outside the ICE facility in Portland unless there is an imminent threat of physical harm. And tomorrow, a hearing is scheduled in the separate lawsuit that was filed by those apartment residents against the federal government, Holly.
And LJ, you mentioned the number of hospital and urgent care visits in the Portland area from these protest-related injuries. I'm wondering if other health departments around the country are also tracking this, and you might be able to gather some bigger numbers so we can see the effects nationwide.
You know what, Holly? We found some information about this in court filings. For example, the Minnesota Health Department said there has been a, quote, notable increase in emergency department visits for injuries potentially related to protest activity. And in Minneapolis, 911 officials said they responded to at least 34 medical calls between December 1st and January 8th alone involving interactions between federal agents and the public, including calls involving pepper spray or tear gas. And that also includes, Holly, at least one call for a baby who couldn't breathe after exposure to tear gas.
How frightening. Scripps News senior national investigative correspondent Lori Jane Gliha live for us. As always, terrific reporting. Thank you. Coming up on Today's It Happened.
We've issued safety recommendations like ADSB in over and over and over again, recommendations that have been rejected, sidelined, or just plain ignored.
Welcome back to Today's It Happened. Okay, let's check back in on our daily briefing of the day's top stories. NTSB Chair Jennifer Homendy faced lawmakers on Capitol Hill today, and this is coming more than a year after a Black Hawk helicopter collided with a passenger jet near Reagan Washington Airport in D.C. Scripps News Washington correspondent Stephanie Liebergen joins us now live from our D.C. newsroom. And Steph, the committee was focused on what's being called systematic failures that led to the disaster. So what exactly does that mean?
Hey, Holly, good afternoon. Well, a big focus on this hearing was on one particular piece of technology they call ADSB. It's both an in and out. So it's an automatic dependent surveillance broadcast technology. It's basically two versions of it. One is an aircraft broadcasting out where they are, but then also another aircraft needs to have the technology to be able to basically take in that signal. So there's two parts that would need to be installed on any given piece of aircraft. Now, this is something that had both pieces been installed and functioning on both the helicopter, the Black Hawk helicopter, and the commercial jet, both aircraft would have received notifications about a potential traffic collision 48 seconds or 59 seconds before the actual crash. So the technology the chairwoman, Jennifer Homendy, believes would have prevented the crash we saw last January. And this isn't new technology. This ADSB in and out is something that the NTSB has recommended that the FAA require on all civilian and military aircraft 18 separate times. And there was frustration both from Democrats and Republicans on this committee and from the chairwoman, Jennifer Homendy, that this recommendation has not been implemented. Take a listen.
Now that our investigation has concluded, I can say without a shadow of a doubt that we've seen this before. We've investigated similar mid-air collisions going back decades, and we've issued safety recommendations like ADSB in over and over and over again, aimed at preventing just these kinds of collisions. Recommendations that have been rejected, sidelined, or just plain ignored.
There is a bipartisan desire on the Senate Commerce Committee to get a piece of legislation that's named the Rotor Act passed and signed by President Trump. It's a bill that was already passed unanimously by unanimous consent in the Senate in December, but it hasn't seen any action yet in the House. This bill would require the ADSB in technology on all civil and military aircraft. It would require the FAA to evaluate the safety of airspace around the country nationwide, and it would also change what some members in Congress believe is a loophole that allows some military aircraft to operate in the D.C. airspace without broadcasting their exact position. So there is certainly a desire to get this legislation moving, but it's unclear exactly why it's getting stalled up in the House. The chairwoman Homendy was asked about that. Some of the reasons that people talk about not wanting to move forward with this bill, airlines, of course, complain about the cost, but Chairwoman Homendy testified today that the piece of technology costs just $400 to get a box to install on in a plane, and that it can be used with just something as simple as a smartphone or an iPad that the pilot can use to kind of take in that technology. So technology is there, and there's definitely frustration that it's not being used to prevent crashes like this one that we saw just over a year ago, Holly.
Did I understand you right? $400 piece of equipment?
She said $400. She had the box with her, and she was holding it up in the hearing saying that this costs $400. You need this. You need a headset, which all pilots already have when they're in their planes, and you need some kind of seemingly smart device, so a cell phone or an iPad that can take in and kind of translate that data and give it to the pilot to help avoid crashes.
Wow. All right. Scripps News Washington correspondent Stephanie Liebergen live for us. Thank you for that update, Steph.
Out west, a landmark trial that could reshape if social media companies can be held responsible for harming young users is now underway in Los Angeles. It is the first time, by the way, that Meta and YouTube are face-to-face with juries. Plaintiffs argue these platforms are designed in ways that contribute to mental health among teens. Wednesday, the head of Instagram taking the stand. Scripps News business and tech correspondent Mara Barrett is live for us in Denver. And Mara, you have been watching this case closely. What happened in court today?
Well, Del, the question of addiction is a key pillar of the case, whether these platforms intentionally are designed in a way that ultimately cause harm to children or minors. And so this case will set a precedent for the thousands of other similar lawsuits against social media companies. And the key thing that we were watching was the head of Instagram taking the stand on Wednesday. There are no cameras in court, and so it's only possible to get updates about the case during lunch breaks and when the court is closed for the day. And so in terms of what we know about Adam Mosseri's, the head of Instagram's appearance yesterday, the plaintiff's lawyers presented quotes from Mosseri's appearance in a podcast interview where he referenced social media addiction in reference to being really active on Instagram. But Mosseri clarified that he used the term too casually. He said internally his colleagues instead used the term, quote, problematic use, and that's to refer to a user spending too much time on Instagram. And he kind of said that this is up to a person-by-person basis. A lot of that can depend on the type of person and how much they're spending on social media, but that he's not a medical expert and he doesn't feel comfortable declaring clinical addiction, which is what the plaintiff's lawyers are really trying to hone in on. He did acknowledge that it's, quote, not good for the company over the long run to make decisions that profit for us but are poor for people's well-being. And so that's something that I think will remain on the record as we continue to cover issues that come up when it comes to social media, addiction, and mental health. There was a lengthy back and forth about cosmetic filters on Instagram that appeared to promote plastic surgery and how that could have caused harm via body image issues or things like that. And so this is really being seen as social media as a big tobacco moment, whether there can be that definitive tie between the product and addiction. And so Meta is really pushing back against that attempt. They wrote in a statement to Scripps News, the question for the jury in Los Angeles is whether Instagram was a substantial factor in the plaintiff's mental health struggles. The evidence will show she faced many significant, difficult challenges well before she ever used social media. And so we saw lawyers for both Meta and Google attempting to shift blame to the plaintiff. The plaintiff here in this case is referred to KGM, claiming that her mental health and depression was a result of family dynamics, not solely social media. And so that's what they're really hinging on in terms of the defense for this case. Several parents of children who have had social media struggles are attending the trial, and they were visibly upset during this discussion, the testimony from Mosseri. They had held a vigil earlier this week and spoke to media saying that they need to be present at this trial for accountability, and they firmly believe that their children could still be alive if Meta had adjusted its algorithm and design practices. They went on to describe social media platforms as a trap in a space far more dangerous than anything we would ever allow in the real world. It's important to note that Snapchat and TikTok were originally named in this same lawsuit that's currently against Meta and YouTube, but they settled before the trial for undisclosed sums. And we expect to hear from Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg at some point next week, Del.
Up next on Today As It Happened.
While on the road, I got this alert. Ukraine's skeleton racer disqualified by the IOC for his helmet. The one showing faces of athletes killed in the war. The air raids from 2 a.m. in Kyiv. Now I'm driving to Dnipro, one of 3 cities Russia hit with ballistic missiles overnight, targeting the power grid. And somewhere in that gap between the explosions and the disqualification is the savage contradiction at the heart of the international order in 2026.
You're watching Today As It Happened. This is Scripps News rundown of the biggest events and stories that happened during the day. So let's jump right in.
An update now on a story we told you about earlier this week. It involves a Ukrainian skeleton athlete who wanted to honor his fallen countrymen in the Russian war during his Olympic run. Seems now that will not happen. Scripps News International correspondent Jason Bellini is in Ukraine with more on the Olympic Committee's decision. Jason?
While on the road, I got this alert. Ukraine's skeleton racer disqualified by the IOC for his helmet. The one showing faces of athletes killed in the war. I didn't sleep last night. The air raids from 2 a.m. in Kyiv. Now I'm driving to Dnipro, one of 3 cities Russia hit with ballistic missiles overnight, targeting the power grid. And somewhere in that gap between the explosions and the disqualification is the savage contradiction at the heart of the international order in 2026. The IOC can enforce helmet rules with near surgical precision. Nearly 4 years into this war, nobody can enforce the rules of life and death. I'm driving toward a city that was just bombed. The headline going viral, a helmet violation. Here's what people woke up to this morning, if they slept through the missiles at all. 2,600 buildings in Kyiv without heat. Russia launching 25 missiles, 24 of them ballistic, at energy infrastructure in 3 cities. The IOC, they hauled Hareskovich in at dawn. This was hours before his competition, and disqualified him for showing face of the dead. Dawn meetings, real-time enforcement, exact citation of Rule 50. Meanwhile, Russia violates every rule that matters. The Geneva Conventions, laws of war, basic human decency. It fires ballistic missiles at power plants in February. Hareskovich says the sacrifice of the people on his helmet means more to him than any medal ever could. Ukrainians feel Russia proved him right with 24 ballistic missiles. Strict rules, no rules. Same world, same day.
Coming up on Today's It Happened.
People are very disturbed by the engagement that they've been receiving from ICE officials and Border Patrol agents.
We're so glad you're back with Today's It Happened. I'm Holly Furfer. We're here with your daily rundown of the day's top stories.
A federal judge blocking the Trump administration from punishing Senator Mark Kelly. This is related to that video of him and other Democrats urging the military to resist unlawful orders. Scripps News congressional correspondent Nathaniel Reed is part of a scrum on Capitol Hill with the senator. Let's listen in right now.
Well, let me just start by saying, hey, this is a critical moment. I felt the need to hold this administration accountable for a violation of my constitutional rights and constitutional rights of more than 2 million retired service members like me who, serve this country, many of them in combat, fighting for our nation, for our Constitution. And this president and his Secretary of Defense, tried to violate those rights, my rights and millions of others. And by the way, this also extends to, U.S. citizens across the country, 350 million people who have been worried about, all kinds of rights in the Constitution that this administration is going after. So this was a moment to hold these guys accountable.
That immigration surge in Minnesota finally coming to an end. That is according to border czar Tom Homan. He claims the Twin Cities are safer, in his words, because of what ICE accomplished there. Scripps News national correspondent Katie Tubman joins us live now from New York. And the operation will be concluding or drawing down. What led to the move?
Well, Del, the word that it may come down to is cooperation. That's the word that Trump's border czar Tom Homan repeated earlier this morning during a press conference, as well as the word that was repeated during the Senate Homeland Security hearing, where we heard from Minnesota officials talking about the ICE operations in the state. And Homan specifically said that he doesn't want to see any more bloodshed and touted successes in Minneapolis, including cooperation with local law enforcement and federal enforcement, as well as local leaders, and changes that have happened on the ground since he was sent to Minneapolis. Now, Homan said these are the reasons for the end to Operation Metro Surge, and take a listen to what he said about that.
With that, and success that has been made arresting public safety threats and other priorities since this surge operation began, as well as the unprecedented levels of coordination we have obtained from state officials and local law enforcement, I have proposed, and President Trump has concurred, that this surge operation conclude.
Now, this announcement from Homan came as Minneapolis officials were testifying before the Senate Homeland Security hearing earlier today. And Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison responded to the news in real time, saying that the operation should be coming to an end. And this is what he had to say about it entirely, as well as the announcement.
But whether from the left to the center to the right, people are very disturbed by the engagement that they've been receiving from ICE officials and Border Patrol agents. I know there's a diversity of views on this esteemed committee, but I would hope that all would agree that we need transparency in terms of the activities of ICE, transparency in terms of the conditions of detention facilities, access to those facilities, a full, fair, and joint investigation into the deaths of Good and Preddy, and into the masking.
Now, Del, that call for transparency is showing up in polling. We saw, according to a new AP NORC poll out today, that about 6 in 10 U.S. adults say that President Donald Trump has gone too far in sending immigration officials and agents into American cities. And so we're hoping to hear more about what the future will look like for Minneapolis and other operations. Del?
Katia, who can forget the words of Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Fry when ICE moved into a city saying they needed to get the F out? Have we heard from anybody from the mayor's staff?
Well, we absolutely did hear from the mayor himself. He put out a statement over X regarding the announcement about the end of the surge of agents to Minneapolis. And with that, he said this operation has been catastrophic for our neighbors and businesses, and now it's time for a great comeback. We will show the same commitment to our immigrant residents and endurance in this reopening. And I'm hopeful the country, will stand with us as we move forward. So definitely a message of hope regarding what's next for the city, but definitely cautious hope as we've seen coming out of the leaders there. And it's what we're hearing as a signal that while there is a way to move forward or hopes for a way to move forward, there's also a call for accountability. The rest of that Senate hearing that we heard from today was regarding answers when it comes to ICE conduct, particularly when it comes to these aggressive operations. They were talking about excessive use of force, asking about shootings against American citizens or breaking down doors without judicial warrants. And so even as we're hearing this tone of de-escalation of hope for the future, we're also hearing for answers and accountability. Del?
Scripps News National Correspondent Katia Tubman, live for us in New York City. Katia, thank you very much. Senate lawmakers failing today to pass that funding bill for the Department of Homeland Security. Because they are now heading for the doors and not working tomorrow, it means we are now one day away from another government shutdown. This one would affect the Department of Homeland Security, the third shutdown in the last several months. Scripps News Deputy Political Director Joe St. George reports on how this partial shutdown will affect you.
Their proposal didn't come close to doing that.
There have been good faith efforts.
Another shutdown of a government agency appears to be just hours away. The Department of Homeland Security runs out of money Friday night. The Cabinet Department employs around 260,000 Americans and is responsible for FEMA, TSA, Coast Guard operations, the Secret Service, and immigration enforcement. Impacts of a shutdown will vary by division.
A funding lapse has severe and lasting challenges for our workforce, operational readiness, and long-term capabilities.
On Wednesday, leaders from the Coast Guard and other divisions testified on Capitol Hill regarding how a shutdown would impact the country and federal employees. The acting administrator of TSA told Congress that in the past, shutdowns impacted morale and the retention of employees.
We heard reports of officers sleeping in their cars at airports to save money on gas.
But the reality is that a DHS shutdown may not trigger widespread issues for everyday Americans right away. Flashpoints in past shutdowns usually occur after missed paychecks. And TSA agents, for example, are not expected to miss their first full paycheck until mid-March. While this imminent shutdown is driven by Democratic demands for immigration enforcement reform, immigration enforcement would also continue for the most part uninterrupted because of ICE funding being previously allocated in President Trump's One Big Beautiful Bill. As far as FEMA goes, the Disaster Relief Fund still has several $1 billion in it, enough to function for at least several weeks to potentially several months. But remember, the shorter the shutdown, the fewer impacts on everyday Americans. The longer a shutdown goes on, the more impacts will pop up. Joe St. George, Scripps News Group, Washington.
Coming up on Today As It Happened, tensions between the U.S. and Iran are rising as President Trump posts that the Pentagon is preparing a second aircraft carrier to deploy to the Middle East. So stay with us here on Scripps News for White House correspondent Haley Bowles reporting from the North Lawn after the break. Glad you're back with Today As It Happened. I'm Holly Furfer. All right, let's jump right back into our rundown of the top stories of the day.
The Pentagon has put out a second aircraft carrier strike group, putting it on standby, preparing to deploy to the Middle East. That is according to the Wall Street Journal. Officials telling the Journal the White House has yet to give the official order to deploy. USS Abraham Lincoln Strike Group is already in the region as Trump determines potential paths to Iran. Scripps News White House correspondent Haley Bull is live on the North Lawn. And Haley, what do we know at this hour?
Yeah, Del, President Trump warning if no deal is reached with Iran, then it will be, quote, very traumatic for them. Now, the new comment comes as the president appears to up pressure on Iran as he balances negotiations with Iran with retaining military options. The president earlier today suggesting a second aircraft carrier strike group has been ordered to prepare to deploy to the Middle East, posting a Wall Street Journal report, an exclusive report suggesting as much on Truth Social earlier today, after telling Axios earlier in the week he was considering sending a second carrier to the region. Now, a former defense official and another expert in the region we spoke with suggest sending a second carrier strike group may be a way for Trump to increase pressure on Iran in the midst of negotiations. The U.S., as you suggested, already increased assets in the area as the president has threatened the potential for U.S. intervention over the past month and a half, but has publicly indicated a preference for negotiations. And that appeared unchanged after President Trump met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu here at the White House yesterday, following talks between U.S. and Iranian officials. Now, Netanyahu telling reporters that during that meeting, he shared skepticism of any agreement with Iran, but also underscored that it needs to include not only nuclear issues, but Iran's ballistic missile program and support for proxies, something Iran has not indicated an openness to. Now, Trump has repeatedly said Iran cannot have nuclear weapons. Netanyahu also telling reporters that the president thinks Iranians have learned who they're dealing with and that the conditions he's creating could create those for a good agreement. Now, following that meeting, the president said he insisted negotiations Iran would continue to see if a deal can be reached, adding this today.
We have to make a deal, otherwise it's going to be dramatic. I don't want that to happen, but we have to make a deal. They should have made a deal the first time, and they got Midnight Hammer instead. And this will be very traumatic for Iran if they don't make a deal. Look, if they don't make a deal, then it'll be a different story. But we had a very good meeting yesterday with Bibi Netanyahu, and he understands, but it's ultimately up to me. If the deal isn't a very fair deal and a very good deal with Iran, then it's going to be, I think, a very difficult time for them.
And Del, how long Iran has, the president suggesting a timeline of about a month or so.
Scripps News White House correspondent Haley Bull for us live on the North Lawn. Haley, thank you very much. Also today, the Census Bureau just putting out its 5-year survey. This is the survey that collects a lot of data on us. Immigration on demographics, social characteristics, and our financial well-being. Scripps News Washington correspondent Stephanie Liebergen combed through all the data. And Stephanie, one group in particular seems to be struggling.
There's a couple groups that are struggling. So this new data from the Census Bureau really tells us the story of how Americans are doing. But financially, this data shows that seniors, renters, and families living in rural communities are struggling.
Some Americans are falling behind financially.
What the story really is, and what's really hitting me very hard right now, is the devastating impact of inflation on people at lower income brackets.
According to new Census Bureau data, seniors, renters, and people living outside of metropolitan areas are struggling.
Constant, butterflies in the stomach.
Jenna Alexander is a senior who was feeling pinched as she watched her rent climb.
Trying to plan what are my options going to be, besides the street.
She moved into a senior living home last year. Census data shows the poverty rate for seniors rose in more than 800 counties from 2020 to 2024 compared to the 5 years before. And inflation wiped out almost all income gains for that group.
And seniors were the lowest of the group when I looked at all the demographics. They only added, so say for every $100, they only added $3.50.
Eric Packman is a data analyst, and he dug into the numbers. He was struck by how renters are falling behind.
Renters are generally lower income and subject to higher cost. And so they get squeezed on both ends.
From 2020 to 2024, rent went up in 20% of counties across the country compared to 2015 to 2019. And the number of inexpensive rental units dropped over the more recent 5-year period, while the availability of pricier units skyrocketed.
There are more units overall, but they're all moving to higher price points. And the income just isn't keeping up with that for renters.
Americans living in rural areas also tend to be worse off financially. According to the new data, the median household income in large metro areas is 30% higher compared to households in rural communities.
When you look at rural, they make less money than metro, and they're considerably closer, even after an increase that kept up with inflation, to the level of poverty to support a family of 4.
So this new census data includes a lot of information, and it also included an interesting number on Americans' educational background. There's one standout: about 90% of metro areas, Dell, saw an increase in the percentage of people 25 and older with a bachelor's degree. So more American adults getting that higher education.
Yeah, we also had that story yesterday that said more American adults are saying, I don't want to go to college because I need to make more money to be able to afford the rent. What about household income? What is the study saying about that?
So median household income for most groups of Americans has gone up, but there is still a notable racial divide in the data. So as an example, the median national household income, about $80,000. That median national household income for Asian Americans, $116,000. For Black Americans, $55,000. So there are still a big racial gap that is persisting in terms of how much money we're able to make and bring home every day.
Every piece of data counts, and each one seems to be pointing in the same direction. People need to make more money. There needs to be more houses.
Indeed.
Scripps News Washington correspondent Stephanie Liebergen. Stephanie, as always, thank you.
We'll be right back with more of today's top stories on Today as It Happened. Welcome back to Today as It Happened. This is Scripps News Debrief of our top stories of the day just for you. So let's get to it.
An act of defiance taking place at this hour. Right now, New York City officials are about to re-raise a rainbow pride flag. The Trump administration ordered that flag removed this week. The location is significant. It is the site of the National Stonewall Memorial Monument, which is considered to be the birthplace of the modern LGBTQ+ civil rights movement. Scripps News national correspondent Mitch McCann is at the rally. And Mitch, before we get to what's behind it, explain why those flags were removed in the first place.
Yeah, hi Dal, nice to be with you from Greenwich Village this afternoon. The reason this flag was taken down, according to the National Park Service, is because of a Trump administration directive at national park sites around the country like this one that says only the US flag can be flown or other authorized flags, which the rainbow flag is not. Now, advocates here say it was quietly taken down in recent days. This isn't really just about the flag, they say. They say it's an attack on LGBT communities around the United States. What we're about to see in the next couple of minutes, you could hear some of the noise behind me. They are about to re-raise that flag next to the USA flag, a really important moment for people here outside a very historic venue, of course, the Stonewall Inn, the modern birthplace of the LGBT rights movement here in the United States. So a very big afternoon here for many of these advocates and council members that are very upset that this flag was taken down.
Mitch, New York City officials say they are prepared to fight. Exactly how do they plan to do so?
Yeah, that's a good question. That has really outraged not just the advocates here, but as you mentioned, city officials. Zohran Mamdani, the mayor of New York, was very unhappy about this and posted as such in the last couple of days. The main way they're going to fight this is through public pressure. We've seen a number of council members and state officials here. Even one of the congressmen from the United States House of Representatives is here raising the flag. So there's a lot of public momentum. But at the New York City Council, they're also trying to pass a resolution to call on Congress to authorize this flag to be flown here. It will be flown here in the next couple of minutes. For the meantime, there's no indication that the National Park Service is going to take it down again, but if they do, Del, you can bet there's going to be a lot of very unhappy people here in New York City.
Public pressure at that particular site. Nothing new to those gathered. Mitch McCann for us live on the scene in New York City. Mitch, thank you very much. It's been 12 days since Nancy Guthrie was last seen. Investigators say they are combing through 18,000 tips they've received. Her daughter, Today Show host Savannah Guthrie, sharing this home video today. She writes, "Our lovely mom, we will never give up on her." Nick Saletti from our Scripps News Group is on the scene right now in Pima County, Arizona. And Nick, what is the latest on the investigation?
Del, we're tracking some major developments in the investigation into the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie right now. Pima County deputies confirming with me they have several pieces of evidence, including gloves that were found somewhere here in her neighborhood in Tucson. All of this as we saw more police activity in this neighborhood today and right in front of Nancy Guthrie's home. I want to show you some video of what we were tracking earlier. We saw what looked like law enforcement come up in unmarked vehicles, putting up a tent in front of Nancy Guthrie's home and covering the patio. Now, why does this matter? This is important because so much of the key evidence that we have seen so far comes from the patio. First, last week, we got confirmation from the sheriff that there was blood evidence that belonged to Nancy on the floor of the patio. And then, of course, just 48 hours ago, we got those chilling images from the Nest doorbell camera released by the FBI showing the person that they think abducted her back on February 1st. That person wearing a mask. The FBI says that he was armed at the time. He had a backpack and also was wearing gloves. Possibly gloves, maybe, that they believe they now have in custody. Now, I want to point out all of that evidence is being tested right now. As we wait for those test results, there's also another plea from law enforcement here in southern Arizona. They're now asking neighbors within a 2-mile radius of Nancy's home to submit any kind of video they have, whether that's a Ring doorbell, home surveillance, cell phone video of people or vehicles that they feel like could be suspicious from January 1st up to February 2nd. So they extended and expanded that window for video that they want to see, hoping in some way that could possibly link them to where Nancy is. You also mentioned Savannah Guthrie posting that heartfelt video earlier on social media showing the childhood photo as well as the home movies. She's saying that she believes she is still out there right now and they are just desperate to be reunited with their mom, Del.
And Nick, we should always remind our audience it is a race against time. Nancy Guthrie, of course, having that heart condition. Once again, if you have any information, contact the FBI. 1-800-CALL-FBI. Nick Saletti for us live on the scene in Tucson, Arizona. Nick, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for joining us on Today As It Happened. I'm Holly Furfer. We hope you have a terrific Thursday night.